Welcome back to the KOAM Morning News. It is a Wildcat Wednesday. We're fortunate enough to be joined by Jesse Gilmore, horticulture expert for K-State Research Extension. Jesse, number one, I hope you had a marvelous Christmas.
Oh, it went very well.
And number two, thank you so much for your time this morning.
No problem. It's good to be back in studio.
It is wonderful to be back in studio. We are here to talk about what I believe is still our country's most popular potted plant during the holiday season, the poinsettia. Is that?
Not only is it the most popular potted plant during the holiday season, it's actually the most popular potted plant, period.
I didn't know that.
Last year, over 35 million poinsettias were sold. It is the number one seller as far as number of plants goes. Mm-hmm. As far as value goes, orchids slightly outpace it in terms of
Makes sense.
cost.
Cost-wise. But number-wise, this is number one.
Yep, and almost all of the sales will be in November and December.
Yeah, in between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Well, but now we've got these throughout the studio. You've got these at home, and we're trying to, number one, we want to take care of them because they're absolutely beautiful, but we've got to address the elephant in the room because they're fatal. I can't.
Not quite. So,
and folks, this is a serious question because it is a common conception that for young children and especially for pets, that poinsettias can be fatal.
It gets a very bad rap for that. I have to say it, that legend goes back to when a child was found dead in the southern United States next to a wild poinsettia plant. They assumed that it was because they ingested the poinsettia. Poinsettias are a member of the spurge family, which means that they're going to exude a milky white sap from the plant tissue when it's damaged. And while that is toxic to some extent, it really depends on the species of spurge that you're looking at. Some species are fatal when consumed. Poinsettias, they've done research and shown that the toxic elements of the sap will not be enough to kill a person, even when ingesting more than a pound of poinsettia foliage, which I don't think anyone's going to be ingesting. And
honestly, if my dog goes through a plant, he or she may get an upset stomach.
Yeah, and this legend is so widespread that advocates for the plant have taken to eating the plant live in front of people to, I guess, show off its non-toxic properties. I would not go quite that far because even if it's not going to kill you, it's still going to make you pretty sick and give you some gastrointestinal issues that you don't want.
Let's not test it at home, but also, too, important to point out when Jesse's talking about this, this is a legend that's more than 100 years old.
Yep.
It's amazing that it's persisted that long. So now that I know it's safe, it's safe to handle, I'm not going to ingest it, how do I keep this thing going? Because I know that in some regions of the world, while we associate it with perhaps Christmas, in some regions it's associated with Easter as well.
Yep. So down in Mexico, where the plant is native, it can get up to 15 feet tall.
My goodness.
A small tree rather than just the potted plant we're familiar with. To keep this in your home over the winter, you would need to put it near a light source. And poinsettias are pretty interesting in that they need a very specific day-night cycle in order to get the color that you would see here, for example. They need about 14 hours of darkness during October when most of them are growing. Luckily, for most people who buy poinsettias every year and don't try and keep poinsettias throughout multiple years, they won't need to worry about that because most of the color will already have been developed in the greenhouses where the plants were grown. But if you are trying to keep your poinsettia for multiple years, which you can do, you will need around October 1st to start thinking about keeping it in a very dark room. Even residual light from like a street light that's shining in through a window where you keep it. Yep, that will delay its color development. So it needs complete darkness, and you need to be pretty diligent with that if you want the color to develop.
To keep these alive, is it best, and I want to go down the road as it begins to warm up, is it best to keep it potted inside the house, or can I go replant it outside?
You can do either. Usually for most poinsettias that you're going to buy, you're going to need to repot it in the spring before temperatures get up to the point where you would want to maybe think about putting it outside. Because they're native to Mexico, they can handle a lot hotter temperatures than we get here. So they would succeed outdoors during the summer. You want to make sure that it's put in a area that gets a lot of direct sunlight and is protected from the wind. So south side of houses is usually pretty good.
So my question to you, if they're good during the summer, how sensitive are they to the cold?
They're very sensitive. When you're storing the plant in your house, usually you'll want to put it in a south-facing window to get that direct sunlight that it needs. You have to make sure that the leaves are not touching the glass because that can send it into a cold shock. Usually you will need to move it away from the glass in the window during nighttime when it gets colder, or draw drapes in order to prevent drafts from getting to the plant.
I got one final one. Actually, I got two final ones before we get out of here because your knowledge of this plant just it blows me away. As somebody who has a tough time keeping plants alive, the question that I always lean on is, how often do I water it? How do I check the soil and the moisture?
So yeah, overwatering is the number one thing that kills most
So you can't
house
overwater
plants.
them.
Yeah, and poinsettias in particular, because they're native to an area that doesn't get a ton of rain, they are going to be pretty sensitive to overwatering. So what you want to do is you want to put your thumb in the soil down to your first knuckle.
Okay.
That's about an inch. And if the top inch of the soil is dry, it needs lukewarm water. And you want to make sure that the water runs out of the pot, essentially. You don't want it sitting in like a saucer that would collect extra water. So you just take it to the sink, turn on the sink to a lukewarm temperature. You don't want to shock it with cold.
Because we're going to shock it, yeah.
And you don't want to have too hot of water either. But let it run through. Let it sit in the sun for the amount of time that it needs and test it every couple of days or so. You're not going to need to water it too terribly often, especially if you're keeping it between 65 and 75 degrees, which is about where you want it during the day. And during the night, you want it about 60 to 65 degrees.
About room temperature in the house.
Yep. Yeah, unless you're keeping your room very hot during the winter.
One final question before we get out of here, because of your extensive knowledge of this particular plant. How and why did you get so involved and so knowledgeable about the poinsettia in particular?
Oh, okay. We might not have time for that, but when I was at K-State in the greenhouse operations management class, we were responsible for growing the poinsettias that we would eventually use in the winter poinsettia sale for the horticulture department. And each of us in the class was responsible for tracking the, I guess, measurements of a certain variety. And my variety was premium ice crystal, and I love that variety because it's not necessarily the solid red that most people think of when they think of poinsettias. There's a lot of different colors now: white, cream. I think there might even be a yellow variety. But premium ice crystal is a variegated variety, so the leaves start red on the outside, and then as you go in, they get a lighter pink-white mixture. So it's kind of a frosted look. And I fell in love.
That's what got you started?
Yep. I fell in love with that. And we learned so much about poinsettias because it is the most valuable, well, the most sold plant in the United States.
Jesse, because of you, all of us have learned a ton about this plant. And now you've given us the impetus to, instead of saying, oh, it's a Christmas decoration, now we all know how to keep them going throughout the course of multiple years. Yep. Jesse Gilmore, horticulture expert from the Kansas State Research and Extension Office, joining us on this Wildcat Wednesday. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And it's great to see you, my man.
Yep.
We'll be back with more KOM Morning News right after this.